All righty, get the screen share going and we are on our way. Hello and good morning. Happy Sunday. Good to be with you all. Looking forward to our day together very much as always. So what do we have here? This is the Persian Gulf. This is the land of Shinar, Sumer, Mesopotamia, land between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. So I usually have more of a zoom out when I start class showing, okay, from when we last left off, who's leading the big cities here and in Egypt. But I thought I'd do a little more of a zoom this time. We know where Egypt is, we get that. So just to kind of get us a little more familiar with the lay of the land. Now, especially at the time in these early years, a few hundred years after the flood, the Persian Gulf was a little further inland. These areas were like on the coast and were kind of swampland. So just a little perspective there. So where we're kicking off today, over here is the city-state of Kish. And over there, we got those two lines of rulers, Ariam, whose name means male gazelle. And now we've got a guy named Aga, who is ruling over there. Right over here is Uruk, which was Nimrod's capital. Right now, his grandson Gilgamesh is the king of Uruk. And let's see, over here is the Tower of Babel and Eridu, that area there. And in Egypt, we left off just last week looking at the pyramid of the pharaoh named Khafre, the second big pyramid there at Giza. So that's where we are picking up as our internet slowly wakes up this morning. So there we are. So we are after the death of ARPACHSHAD, working our way down. So we got 4 generations alive right now. SHELAH, EBER, PELEG, and Ru. So we're looking at the world that Ru is growing up in. So taking our field trip, let's take a look at the flow of things, see where we are at and where we are going. So in the lifetime of Ru and the lifetime of Gilgamesh, we've seen the death of ARPACHSHAD. Gilgamesh has grown up to become the ruler of Uruk. We're going through the 4th dynasty, started by Sneferu. We've seen the first big pyramid of his son Khufu and next pyramids that follow. Today, we're going to wind down the 4th dynasty, cross over the 2400s BC into the 2300s, into the 5th dynasty, aiming towards the death of Shelah and the Nimrod generation. We'll end up with the birth of SERUG, then go into his lifetime and what happened there. So winding down the 2400s, getting into the 2300s. Aren't we excited? Cool, glad to hear it. So picking up where we left off after that second pyramid of Khafre, let us go to right here. There is his pyramid. It's the one that has a bit of the cap remaining on it to help distinguish it from the others as we see those. So that's going on here. And again, just keep in mind, I'm just taking us on a visual scenic tour. My job is to try to take you there and understand the world that was going on, the times of these names in the Bible we read about, like Ru, who is Abraham's great-great-grandpa. So there's Khafre's pyramid where we left off, and here is Khafre's tomb and a sarcophagus, so that's there. So winding up Khafre, we go on after that grand pyramid to something not quite so grand. This next guy we know about is named Bakare or Bakiris. We don't know much about him. In fact, all we've got is this little speck of something down here, which is not much. But in here, we found some writings about this guy, and everything we see indicates that he was from this time frame. And where's my mouse? There's my mouse. I love old photographs. This one's from 1905. And so there's the final resting place of Pharaoh Bakare. Again, not much else known about this guy. But we do know that after him, we've got the 3rd pyramid, and that in that Giza, when you see the 3, now we're going to deal with that last one. And this belongs to a guy named Menkaure. here he is. Now notice, as we talked about the depictions of the pharaohs and the people from these times, how different time frames go through different styles. And so what we're starting to see here is we are getting more specific about the features, and that will happen more and more. We actually have, artistic talent able to reproduce what these guys actually look like. And so we're getting more of a sense of these real human beings alive at the time, the same people in the Bible that we're talking about. So this next pyramid, the third pyramid, belongs to this guy, Menkaure, who's the new pharaoh of Egypt in this fourth line of rulers, this fourth dynasty. So let's go check that out. Ta-da, there it is. Put that up for a second. So there it is there. It is a bit smaller than the other pyramids. Let me open up here. This is one of my favorite pictures that I've seen. I think that's just cool. I love that as a wallpaper or something. His is the smaller one. Yeah, off to the side here. So sometimes it depends on if you're looking at it from the north looking south, from the south looking north, that can change which side they're on. Menkaure is the one in the middle there with the cap here. So his pyramid is about half the size of the other pyramids. It is now about 200 feet tall, 356 feet at the base. And so let's take a look at some shots here about that. Again, these are just pictures that people put, not all related. That's the wrong pyramid. That's DJOSER'S step pyramid from the third dynasty. And see how much smaller it is right here compared to the other two? That's a good shot right there. Said about half the size.
I was watching something on YouTube or whatever, and they talked a little bit more about the smaller pyramids.
Yeah.
And they said it goes from the large ones, which is where the pharaohs are buried.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next level would be, or size would be the wives.
Yes, there are a lot of those.
The smaller ones would be the children.
Mm-hmm. So they have their priorities straight. And we'll leave that where it stands. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yes. So there was definitely a method to their madness and an approach to it. And in their society, the higher up you rated, of course, the more stuff and recognition you got. Yeah. He who dies with the most toys, as we said in the 80s.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking about how they threaten their kids. If you don't behave.
Yeah.
You're gonna get, a small pyramid.
Yes.
I'm not going to bury anything.
Right.
You're going to the underworld in coach.
Right. See, I just assumed that they were all buried together.
Yeah.
I did.
Naturally, yeah, you would think family plots and all that. Yeah. No, there are lots of subsidiary pyramids for multiple wives and things like that. So yeah. Servants, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that just kind of shows how, from the beginning of time, man always kind of had a thinking.
Oh yeah.
Right? The things that we, or the people that we would elevate.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of getting on a little tangent here. I saw something, a Christian production on YouTube talking about, false gods and how they put so much emphasis on this stuff. But then they said, what are our gods today? Because a lot of times we think about money and stuff. But then they showed football players. They showed stadiums full of people going to see the latest band.
Yeah.
When you have these stadiums that are filled with 40, 50, 60,000 people, to be entertained.
Yeah.
This is where the things that we pay our money towards. So it's not always how we talk about the love of money or our jobs. Sometimes we definitely elevate men and women into into these kind of idol things, and it kind of made me pause a little bit, and I'm like, wait a second, I like going to the movies. We went and saw, Trace Atkins. Yeah, I like, my country shows and stuff, but obviously, the point is anything that comes before the Lord is in danger of, being an idol. Right?
Well, just remember the Baptist mantra. If it hurts, it's good for you. And if it's fun, it's a sin. Not quite. As long as we can keep things in their place, not only how we spend our money, but how we spend our time. That shows you do what you love, as you say. Brother Kevin.
Is the little itty pyramid, is that the children or is that their minions?
That one I would have to check on. There are a few in front. This shot, there's actually two there, one hidden kind of in the shadow of the other. So there's one there, one there. Yeah. So I would have to take a look and see which ones those are specifically. But yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing, is whether it's the wives, the kids, servants, whatever. Of course, a little better for servants now. We saw in the earlier dynasties how the servants were sacrificed to go along with their king. So different times. Brother Clay. Yeah. Yes. You are so right.
It's already there. I mean, they have to be living when they were for Pharaoh to have the pyramid built for his future children.
Mhm.
That's assuming that when they still away from the family when
Actually, we see, just like we see in later times in France and England and other places where it's family, where the son will take over, or if there's no son, there'll be brothers. We see the same thing in Israel and Judah as well, with those split kingdoms, as far as who becomes the next pharaohs or who's next in line and things like that. And military coups and takeovers that happens in Egypt, that happens, it's the way of the world.
Johnny might grow up.
Yes. Ah, I see what you're saying. So a pharaoh could have, so one of these kids having a little mini pyramid for a mini me here. Well, if he becomes pharaoh, he's going to have his own big pyramid. So he's got two. That's a case by case thing when they would kind of see how things are going and work on things. And you would have your the guy who would, your successor name. And lots of times what they would start doing, this actually started after one pharaoh got assassinated. They realized, well, we don't really have a game plan, where they started having co-regencies, where after a certain age, and this happens with our Bible kings too, where after a certain age, they would have a designated son, usually firstborn, not always, share the throne with them and be kind of in training to take over after they go. When Joseph went to Egypt, there were two pharaohs. And the dad, Senuseret III, and his son Amenemhet III, who was the main pharaoh of the time of there with the famine and all. So yeah, those were all factors to be considered. And so depending on your ambitions and where you stood in life and where you got what you got. And there's this thing, just like we have patricide as a murder of a father, matricide, murder of a mother, we have this thing called regnicide, depending on how you pronounce it, or regicide, where those who are reigning, those who are related to the king, all get slaughtered too, so that you don't have anyone seeking revenge, living to, yeah. So yeah, crazy world. Someone else had a hand up? I see a hand. Yeah, go ahead. Let us know what comes back. So after Menkaure's pyramid, we've got all the three biggies in place now. We are now crossing over into past 2400 BC into the 2300s. I know a few weeks ago I said we were doing that then. That was a false start, so penalty flag on me. I made my 60-year correction, and now we're here. So now into the crossing over. So at the end of the 2400s, we're seeing Egyptians are using papyrus a lot more to write. In Mesopotamia, they're using a number system, pretty much like we use now, the Hindu Arabic system. So these things are happening. The cult of Osiris is starting to rise up now, competing with some of these other gods as well. Okay, Peggy.
Okay, back to pharaohs.
Yeah.
What would an average life expectancy? Because again, when you see the statues or whatever, you never see an old one, like gray. You know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say? When we see old statues.
Well, that's because I'm paying for it. That's because I'm the one paying for it to be done. So make me look good.
But
There's some of that.
Were their life expectancies short?
Great question about the life expectancies of these guys, especially interesting compared with the guys of the Bible that I'm telling you are alive at the same time, who are living couple. So great question as this transitionary time is happening. Well, I will say this. You ever see pictures of United States presidents at the start of their term of office and at the end, the before and the after? Life expectancy suddenly get a lot shorter once you become pharaoh. And turns out we're seeing reigns. We're going to actually start having dates now. Aren't we excited? In the 2300s, we'll see that they're only pharaoh for a few years. Like the first guy in the 2300s, next pharaoh, Shepsaketh, he reigns from 2395 to 2391 BC. So 4 years as pharaoh. Yes. Yeah. And so, but as far as life expectancy goes, we will see later on there's a pharaoh, Pepi II, who reigns, since childhood for for plus 60 to 90 years, depending on who you listen to. So yeah, but we're definitely in that transition time where the age spans are getting shorter and shorter.
Isn't there one, I don't remember if it's in the Bible, if it was something I recall, where he became king at like age 6, but
Mhm.
then died at like age 19? Or was killed or?
There are two youngest kings in the Bible. Well, there was, of course, in Egypt, we have King Tut, who was at the time of David, boy king. But in the Bible, we have two main boy kings, Joash and then Josiah. Josiah is the more famous one, who was king at 8, but Joash was actually earlier at the age of 6. And he was a faithful king all the time that the priest who raised him was alive. As soon as that priest died, he went bad, ended up getting killed by his own servants. And the priest got buried with the kings, but the king got buried outside, not with the rest of the kings. So yeah, so lots of crazy stuff happened. And Josiah was doing great until he took it upon himself to go to battle against Pharaoh Necho, got himself killed. And Jeremiah lamented about him and all that stuff. So yeah, choices and awareness and dealing with the world we're living in and society, all sorts of stuff going on here. So now that we're into the 2300s, we now have dates. So remember that city Kish I mentioned, where we've got those 2 lines of rulers? Not anymore. Now we've got a new dynasty. The second dynasty has just got 1 ruler at a time now. And so dynasty 2 in Kish starts in 2397 BC. And it starts with this guy named Su something. It gets cut off and we don't know what the rest of it is. It's SU something. First king of the second dynasty of Kish. But that brings us to this next guy in the continuing Egypt's 4th dynasty. This next guy named Shepsaketh, who becomes pharaoh in 2395 BC. Now, I mentioned a date, 2395 BC. The big question is, so what? A date by itself means zip. The only purpose for dates is to have a comparison and see how things line up together. And so without that, date by itself means nothing if you don't know where it belongs in the grand scheme of other things and how cause and effect, how things flow from one to the other. Okay, so this guy became pharaoh in 2397 BC. Well, what happened before to bring him to this point? What happens afterwards because of it? So that's where it all fits. So don't get too hung up on dates and names, not anything we have to remember, but just seeing the big picture of the flow. That is how life happened as the Lord was trying to get people's attention. Again, we're seeing the seekings and strivings of man, contrasting that with the unchanging goodness of God that we'll see continuing in Zechariah today. So this new guy, Shepsaketh, this is somewhat interesting. Not exactly a pyramid he gets. See, there's an example of the size showing this last pyramid, how much smaller it is, about 200 feet tall. And there's his sarcophagus there. So that's the end of Menkaure, the 3rd pyramid guy. So now we go to Shepsaketh. And he does not have a pyramid. He has what's called a mastaba, which is this flat thing here. Let's take a closer look at that. So that's it. Looks like it almost might be the startings of a pyramid, but not quite. No, this is it. Exactly. And this was intentional. Again, look at the size of the blocks compared to the people. And we're talking 4,000 years ago. Yeah, 4,300 years ago. that was all put together. Before Abraham was born, his great grandpa was alive for all this. That's the step pyramid of Djoser, the first pyramid. Don't know, some of these pictures are in there. Yeah, these, again, kind of like Wikipedia or anything else, that's what people put in there, so take these with a grain of salt. Yeah, especially when I'm trying to be educational and academic here, yes. Yeah. Again, some field trips my family will not be taking.
Let's get in there.
Yes. This reminds me of the sign in MASH for some reason, which shows all the different locations. Someone's wall, yeah. Happy little kid there. Yeah. Yes. So some of the outside area there. He's not as happy as a kid, but that's okay. Or just being serious. Yeah. Yeah. But there it is in relation to some of the other pyramids. Again, this is further south from Giza. So we've got the bent pyramid and the red pyramid. See, there's a better look at that. Yeah. Makes me want to put frosting on the top or something, you know?
It does look like it's unfinished though. I mean, you could
Yeah.
conclude it like if you know, you were a scientist, you could just be like, oh, they must have stopped building this. Something must have happened.
Mhm.
So it was intentionally built like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was intentionally built. He wanted to go in a different direction. So I was going to go back to that. So yeah, and he definitely did. So while everyone else is building the pyramids, we don't know why he did not do a pyramid for himself, but we see that this was his result. He went for that. Yeah, break the mold. I'm going to do something different. Maybe it's threatened by the competition. I don't know. But anyway, so he became pharaoh in 2395 BC. Well, as mentioned, his reign wasn't very long. Shortly thereafter, 2391 BC, we've got a new pharaoh named Harjadedeth, and we know pretty much nothing else about him. Last pharaoh, the fourth dynasty. So that has now come to a close. So we are now starting the fifth dynasty, number 5, fifth line of rulers. Again, these dynasties were figured out and named many years afterwards. They didn't have any concept of it at the time. So this new fifth dynasty started by this pharaoh named Userkaf, became pharaoh in 2389 BC. Notice the facial features here, how we're getting a lot more specific and seeing a lot more character and personality in these guys as we're moving forward in time and the artistic intentions and designs and desires are changing. So I mentioned the cult of Isis that's developing and getting more popularity. Well, before there is the cult of the sun god Ra. So there's some competition here. So right now they're still building the things for Ra. He built a temple to Ra that we're going to see here. But taking a look, for example, at the pyramid of Userkaf, here is what remains of that. Again, especially compared to the others. Now, if it just looks like a mound of dirt and rocks, yeah, that's what remains of his pyramid.
Intentionally built that way?
That's what remains now. That's not how it was built originally. So, but there it is compared to Djoser's pyramid. He specifically wanted to move away from all the big fancy stuff, and for more spiritual and practical reasons, wanted to be closer aligned with Djoser, built the first pyramid. Want to be less caught up in all the big stuff. Yeah, not quite looking the same. Again, that's the step pyramid of Djoser. Step pyramid again. That is the Medum pyramid that we saw earlier. That's clearly not Userkaf's pyramid. That's the bent pyramid again. Here we go. There's Djoser's pyramid in the background. More of the remains.
Where does the city of Petra, is it this same time frame? as-
That, great question. So Peggy is asking about the city of Petra, which is also the name of one of my favorite Christian rock bands. Petra is over in the Middle East. It is in the territory of, at the time, Esau or Edom. So that was actually built and established much later, because if you go through the genealogy of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. So where we are 4 generations before Abraham, they're 3 generations after Abraham. Actually 4, yeah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. So they are definitely a bit later on in the scene, but that will definitely come into play. In fact, Petra means rock. Peter, Petros, that's a connection in the naming. And so the comparison in Matthew 16, Jesus says, yeah, you, Peter, are the little stone, but I am the Christ. I'm the bedrock that you just proclaimed, and building my church upon that bedrock. Petra was known for its fortifications and rock cliffs and all that stuff, which is why Obadiah, first of the minor prophets written, talks about Edom and then rejoicing over Judah's failures, and how though you're high up like an eagle, you're going to be brought down low. So Petra's a fascinating city, lots of stuff. Yeah, lots of good stuff about that. But that's all previews and spoiler alerts. We'll get to all that much later on, but good stuff, definitely. So this guy Userkov with his not much of a pyramid here. Turns out the core, because remember, pyramids at the time, they had smooth limestone coverings and they were all nice and polished. Well, in his case, the core was so badly laid, once the pyramid's outer casing of the limestone was robbed, it crumbled into that pile of rubble that we see that's left. Yeah. So someone didn't get their building permits. There you go. So yeah, but he also built the worship temple for the sun god, the sun temple. And again, not much remains here of that either. Get that to go in a little more. Just a little plot of dirt here with some rocks around it. So not much exciting to see here. But this was called the Menkaure, or the stronghold of Ra, which was a mortuary temple for the setting sun. So they mourned the sun going down like they would mourn someone dying. So it was a religious ritual mourning the loss of the sun at night. But they were very big into the whole rebirth thing, and the pharaoh followed the sun through the underworld during the night and then rising with the sun in the morning, which is why a lot of things faced east, where the sun rose. And a lot of things are in our faith and in our Judeo-Christian faith, a lot of things face east too, because it's recognized in scripture that Christ is coming from the east and landing on the Mount of Olives. So a lot of things are aiming in that direction. Peggy had asked a few weeks back about computer graphics and generating the images of what things look like. Here's some sense of that, where he didn't have quite the big pyramid as the others, but there's an idea of what it would have looked like. Of course, they've got different dates. So there's the inside core, which instead of limestone being put together, instead of granite blocks put together, they used rough limestone that they used mortar to slap together. It didn't hold up as well as we saw. Yeah, Userkov was from 2389 to 2382. Yep, 7 years. We've had presidents longer than that. Yeah, so there's again some computer rendering of the area, and that's what we got today. More computer rendering of the lay of the land. And that's what we got now. And there we are. So there's his sun temple. And so he was definitely trying to go back to the first guy with the temple, with a pyramid, Djoser, step pyramid, trying to go more to that harmonious, altruistic relationship of the pharaoh with the people. Another thing that's happening too is as they're worshiping Ra, they're diverting more finances towards that. So that's another reason why we're seeing less grand pyramids for the big guys. There's only so much money to go around. Or as Margaret Thatcher famously said, eventually you run out of other people's money. So that's Userkov. Now we get to over in Uruk. Gilgamesh now passes the torch onto his son Ur-Lugal in the city of Uruk, over there. And this brings us to the last Pharaoh we'll talk about this morning, then we'll switch over to Zechariah. This Pharaoh is named, let's see, this next picture here. Yes, this Pharaoh is named Sahure. Pharaoh Sahure, his name means he who is close to Re, the sun god. Now, I'm not going to say that this statue here, that this Pharaoh looks like anyone that I know. I'm just going to say that Brother Madrano might want to check his ancestry DNA, ancestry.com. So, but Pharaoh Sahure, he who is close to Re, here is his pyramid, right down here. Again, just a mound of dirt. That's all it remains. So what did this guy do while he was Pharaoh? He was Pharaoh from 2382 to 2370 BC, so about 12 years. So during his time, he did a lot more with the Navy of Egypt, a lot more travel expeditions and bringing stuff back from other places. And so he brought back from Lebanon the cedar trees, slaves, and other items. Earliest recorded trip to Punt, which was further south, bringing back myrrh, malachite, electrum. We actually have in his temple stuff, we have a relief showing him gardening, with some of the stuff that was brought back. This is the only picture we have of any pharaoh whatsoever doing anything like gardening. So there's that. Also bringing back brown bears from Syria and all sorts of other things. Also in the writings inside of here, we see the earliest mention of pirates raiding the Nile Delta. His pyramid at the time of construction went to about 154 feet, still much smaller than the other pyramids. So that's a good stopping place for now with him. And we'll pick up after Sahure. But now let's go over to the book of Zechariah. So while all this stuff is going on, these people are living and dying and reigning and building and leaving buildings behind. Where is God in all this, and what's he wanting from the likes of us? We'll pick up in Zechariah chapter 11. Now remember, this is the end of the New Testament. This is the time when they are rebuilding their temple. Solomon's temple got destroyed by Babylon. Persia conquered Babylon, so now they're able to go back home and rebuild, but they've been dealing with a lot of distractions, a lot of outside influences, so they've been discouraged. So God uses Haggai and Zechariah to encourage the people to get back on task, building what the Lord has for them to build, and understanding that he has a plan and a purpose for everything he's doing. So we've seen in the prior chapter some prophecies that Jesus fulfilled that Zechariah was looking forward to. In chapter 11, verse 10, we'll see God talking about some things that have happened and where he's going from here. So verse 10 of chapter 11. So we'll take it from 10 down to 13. I took my staff favor and cut it in pieces to break my covenant, which I had made with all the peoples. Wow. So it was broken on that day. Thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized it was the word of the Lord. I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Price Judas was paid for betraying Christ. 13, then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price, little sarcasm there, at which I was valued by them. So I took 30 shekels of silver. So I took 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. What happened when Judah threw his money down when he repented? They said, well, it's money spent on blood, so we can't put it back in the treasury. Let's just give it to the potter's feet. And so here we see that being prophesied, that those things would happen.
Sorry, what chapter is that, right?
That was chapter 11.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Zechariah 11 from 10 down to 13. Yeah, I took my staff favor, cut it in pieces to break my covenant, which I had made with all the peoples. It was broken on that day. Thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized it was the word of the Lord. I said to them, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, so God's talking to Zechariah, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver, threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. So here God is having this acted out physically in reality in front of their eyes to tell them and show them what's going to be happening with his son, with Jesus Christ, and how he's going to be belittled and betrayed and mocked and all these things that are happening. So skip down to chapter 12, verse 10. Of course, God doesn't stop there. Here's where he's going with all this. Zechariah 12, verse 10. I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, so that they will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and they will weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over the firstborn. This is often described as relating to the time when, in the end times, when the Jews are going to realize Jesus Christ was their Messiah all along, and they're going to mourn what they've done to him. But we also see clearly Christ is being described here when Christ is pierced. None of his bones were broken, which is another prophecy, but instead his side was pierced, to confirm he was dead. Where the other, God bless you, where the other men on the cross, they were still alive, so the legs were broken to speed up the process, so they couldn't lift themselves up to breathe. So there's that prophecy that will be fulfilled. And now skip down to chapter 13, picking up in verse 6. Zechariah 13:6. Now this is a time when prophets were being persecuted. So a prophet would hide the fact that they were a prophet. And sometimes prophets would cut themselves or injure themselves to show their sacrifice, to show their submission and all that stuff. That was a common practice around. And so picking up in verse 6, one will say to him, because he won't back up to verse 5, he'll say, I'm not a prophet, I'm a tiller of the ground, for a man sold me as a slave in my youth. Verse 6, one will say to him, oh, what then are these wounds between your arms? So he will say, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. So the guy's saying, I'm not really one of those prophets, I was just praying for my friends and we got injured. But ironically, he's speaking about Christ and how Christ was going to be able to say, sadly, that the wounds he received, the wounds Christ received were the wounds he received in the house of his friends. So here's another prophecy looking forward to Christ being our substitute. All the abuse, all the rejection, all the mocking, all the ridicule that we're used to and we see and deal with was actually placed on him, which is why it says the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. Everything was laid on Jesus Christ. And that's what Zechariah is ultimately pointing to here. As we see in verse 7, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man, my associate, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd that the sheep may be scattered. And I'll turn my hand against the little ones. Christ talked about this the night of the Lord's Supper. You strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. That's what happened when Jesus was arrested. It'll come about in all the land, declares the Lord. 2 parts in it will be cut off and perish, but the third will be left in it. So Paul talks about there's always a remnant. No matter what persecution happens, God always preserves a remnant and a faithful. And anyone can be a part of it if we just choose to hang in there and be faithful to him. So here's what he says about that remnant being preserved. And in verse 8, the whole thing about a third, you see in Revelation, a third, this happened to a third, this happened to a third. So that phrase is in there a lot. Verse 9 of Zechariah 13. I will bring the third part through the fire, refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people. And they will say, the Lord is my God. So we'll see when we get to Romans 11 Wednesday, how Paul talks about there is a further renewal and opportunity for the Jews who have currently rejected Christ. There will be a restoration and a coming back around for them. But this is also for us too, who are faithful and endure and stay with God when others fall away. As was said in John 6, when Christ talked about eating his flesh, drinking his blood, and they couldn't handle it, but people left. Christ goes to Peter and says, will you also fall away? Him and the 12. And they said, where would we go? And I pray that that's all of our attitude, not that we don't know what our options are, but that this is the option we choose. Of all the options out there, we choose to stick with Christ. He says, I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. Finally, chapter 14, here's what we have to look forward to, verse 4. In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley, so that half of the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south, which is exciting stuff to look to. So there's that reference to the east and the Mount of Olives there again, Zechariah 14:4. But just as the angels told the apostles, just as he rose up and ascended from the Mount of Olives, so too he will return. That's where he is coming back to. And so, and the terrain is going to change when Christ comes back. Ezekiel describes the future temple. Well, if you run the numbers and you measure the land, there's not room in the land geography for the temple that's described in Ezekiel. What's going to happen is when Christ comes back, geography is going to be changed a bit to make way for the millennium and the temple that's going to be there. So that's what's being looked forward to in Zechariah 14:4. And skip down to verse 9. The Lord will be king over all the earth. In that day, the Lord will be the only one, and his name the only one. So I've been talking about these pharaohs and these kings of these city-states, and how as we'll go on, we'll see that they end up trying to pass the torch to their sons. They end up killing each other, and all sorts of things happen. All sorts of rivalries, kingdoms taking over under other kingdoms. There's come a day that is all done. That is all past. It is only Jesus ruling the whole earth. What a day that'll be. So verse 9 is a great verse to look forward to. And we'll close in verse 16. Then it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to celebrate the Feast of Booths. Again, that Feast of Booths is so important. That Feast of Tabernacles, it's living, it's camping out and living with God, Emmanuel, God with us. And that is such an important theme in the Old Testament into the New and into the future for us. So again, while we see the crumbling results of man's accomplishments, God is still building his church with the living stones that we are. So that's what we have to look forward to, be blessed to be a part of. So I'll close there. Any other thoughts, comments, questions on anything from today? If not, enjoyed the discussion and questions very much. We'll go ahead and turn the services over. So stop the share. Oops. Stop the share.